A horror director got arrested for murder, police raided video stores, and an FBI opened investigations, all because of movies that were just supposed to be fake. So, these are banned horror movies of history that have real legal consequences to watch or own. So here's the thing that's gonna blow your mind about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This movie got banned for being too violent, but if you've watched it, you'd know it barely shows any blood. Like seriously, you see more gore when you accidentally cut yourself making a sandwich. But somehow, this film got censors so worked up that the UK banned it for 24 years. 24 years! That's probably longer than most of you have been alive. The British Board of Film Classification took one look at this movie in 1975 and basically said, nope, that ain't happening, we're not dealing with that. And here's what's wild. It wasn't even because Leatherface was running around with a chainsaw. It was because the movie felt too real, too hopeless. The censors literally wrote that it had no moral catharsis, which is fancy talk for the bad guy doesn't get punished at the end, and that makes us uncomfortable. But wait, it gets better. In my home country, Ottawa, Canada, police actually showed up at movie theaters in 1976 and told them to stop showing the film or face morality charges. Imagine being a theater owner and having cops walk in like, sir, get down on the ground! Get down on the ground! Drop the DVD! Drop the DVD, get down on the ground! The theaters, being reasonable business people who didn't want to get arrested for showing a movie, immediately pulled it from screenings. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but surely it was just a few uptight countries overreacting, right? Wrong. This thing got banned in Norway until 1997, Finland kept it banned until 1996, Sweden said no until 2001, and Brazil just said absolutely not and banned it outright. It's like the whole world collectively decided that a movie about a guy in a skin mask was somehow gonna bring down civilization. Tobe Hooper, the director, always insisted he was making a dark comedy. A comedy! The man thought he was making people laugh, and instead he created something so disturbing that governments were like, this is a threat to public safety. That's either the worst comedic timing in history or the most accidentally effective horror movie ever made. The BBFC examiner who first watched it wrote that it was an abomination on screen. An abomination, not too violent or inappropriate for kids. An abomination. Like it was some kind of supernatural evil that crawled out of a film projector. Meanwhile, kids today watch way worse stuff on TikTok right before breakfast. But here's where it gets even more absurd. By the time they finally unbanned it in 1999, the BBFC admitted that its impact had diminished. No kidding, it turns out that what horrified people in 1974 seemed pretty tame compared to what Saw was doing to people's intestines in movie theaters. Who could have seen that coming? The best part? The film's distributors started using the bans as marketing, which in my humble opinion is a really smart idea. If you're gonna make something like this and the governments don't want people seeing it, lean into that. If my videos ever become banned government contraband, I want y'all marketing the hell out of that stuff. We're gonna start like a whole criminal organization about just YouTube videos. Basically, banned in numerous countries became a selling point. Nothing says must-see cinema like telling people the government doesn't want them to watch. Because who actually wants to listen to the government? We all do it because we have to, not because we want to, right? Ultimately though, the only thing this movie did was just scare censors, but some filmmakers actually convinced people they filmed real murders. And so far, if you're enjoying this video, I'd like it if you could hit the like button and subscribe if you want more content just like this, because one, it's free, and two, it's the only way to let the YouTube algorithm know that my videos are worth seeing by the masses. And it also makes my dog happy. He might make a cameo in this video somewhere. Somebody comment if they see him at all. Now let's talk about Sam Raimi, a guy who just wanted to make a fun little horror movie and accidentally created what might be the most famous banned film in British history. What you're gonna learn in this video is that the UK and British people are very sensitive and they don't like movies that are scary. The Evil Dead is basically what happens when film students get a camera, some fake blood, and way too much creative energy. Here's what's hilarious. The movie got released on video in the UK in 1982 with zero problems. People bought it, watched it, nobody died, like most other movies. But then the moral panic hit. Suddenly, this cabin in the woods romp about demons and chainsaws became public enemy #1. It got added to something called the Video Nasties list, which honestly sounds like a bad corn category or my browser history, but was actually the government's official list of films that could get you arrested for selling. And when I say arrested, I mean it. Police literally raided video stores like they were busting drug dealers. Picture this, cops kicking down the doors, not looking for cocaine, but searching for copies of a movie where Bruce Campbell fights his own hand. Store owners were literally getting prosecuted under obscenity laws for having this thing on their shelves. It's literally like getting arrested for having too graphic of Halloween decorations. The whole thing was so absurd that Sam Raimi himself had to show up in British courts to defend his movie. Imagine being a young filmmaker and having to fly to another country to explain to judges why your fake demon movie isn't corrupting society. Well, Your Honor, you see, the trees aren't actually evil. We just put some guys behind them with some sticks. It's called practical effects. Honestly though, Sam Raimi, I love some of your movies, but you should go to court after what you did in Doctor Strange 2. That thing was trash. But here's where it gets really weird. The specific scene that caused the most problems wasn't even the gory stuff. It was what fans call the tree scene. And look, I'm not going to describe it in detail because this is YouTube and not HBO, but let's just say it involves nature being very inappropriate with one of the characters. The censors saw this and basically went, nope, that's crossing a line we didn't even know existed. Also, like, splinters, ouch. What kills me is that Raimi always said this scene was supposed to be so over the top that it was almost silly. Like, it's a tree. It's not exactly reality. But the British censors weren't in on this joke. They watched it and thought, this is what's wrong with society. Meanwhile, the director was probably sitting in Michigan like, guys, it's just a tree, come on. The ban lasted until 1990, when they finally allowed a cut version. But get this, they had to remove parts of the tree scene and some of the gore. So for years, British horror fans were stuck watching Evil Dead, the polite version. And here's the kicker. By 2001, they said, you know what? Never mind, it's all good, bro, just release your movie. And they released it completely uncut. Turns out what seemed horrifying in 1982 was pretty tame compared to what Hostel was doing to people in multiplexes, which we're going to talk about later. Who would have thought that horror movies would get more extreme over time? Shocking development there, everyone. The whole Evil Dead situation basically created the template for video store panic. See a scary movie? Ban it first, ask questions later. It's literally the movie equivalent of shoot first, aim second, except instead of bullets, it's lawsuits and police raids. Evil Dead was obviously fake though. Next up, authorities thought they were watching actual murder. Now, Faces of Death is basically what happens when someone decides to make a documentary about death, but has the production budget of a high school drama club. The whole thing is hosted by this guy calling himself Dr. Francis B. Gross, which sounds like a name you'd make up if you were trying way too hard to sound scary and you're like an edgy teenager or something. The movie's just a bunch of death footage stitched together. Some of it's real, but it's like actual autopsy footage and surgery clips. Some of it's fake, like this one famous scene where people supposedly eat monkey brains at a restaurant. Spoiler alert, they didn't actually kill a monkey for your viewing pleasure. It was staged. But the filmmakers weren't exactly putting up big signs saying, this is fake, because you know, that would ruin the whole movie. But here's where it gets ridiculous. The movie marketed itself as being banned in 46 countries. 46, that's like at least half the world saying, nah, we're not watching this movie. Now, was it actually banned in 46 countries? Probably not, but it sounds impressive, and nothing sells tickets like telling people the government doesn't want them to see something, which you're gonna realize by the end of this video is a big trend. The FBI actually got involved because there's this one segment that shows what looks like a cult sacrifice. People getting murdered by weirdos in robes. Very dramatic, very bloody, very convincing if you're watching it in 1978 and haven't seen every horror movie trick in the book. So federal agents had to sit down with popcorn and watch this thing to determine if they were looking at evidence of actual homicide. Picture that investigation.
Well, Johnson, after careful analysis of the blood splatter patterns and victim reactions, we've determined this is pig intestines and community theater acting.
Yeah, that must have been a funny report to write, huh? But the real controversy wasn't even the fake human deaths. It was the animal stuff, because some of that was real. They actually ended animals on camera, which is both disturbing and in many places illegal to show in movies, as it should, because 1, that is messed up, 2, I love my dog, and 3, you can just use a prop. So while everyone was worried about fake murder, the real animal cruelty was sitting right there. The UK put it on the video nasties list. Australia banned it, and basically every country with functioning censorship said absolutely not. But here's the thing. It became this weird rite of passage for teenagers. Kids would dare each other to watch it, like it was some kind of test of how tough you were. Oh, you think you're brave? Watch Faces of Death. And the crazy part, most of those kids probably saw worse stuff accidentally while scrolling through the internet today. But back then, it was the most shocking thing you could possibly see. It was like the ultimate forbidden fruit, except the fruit was a poorly made documentary about people dying. At least Faces of Death mixed real and fake. One film convinced cops they'd found actual snuff footage. Alright, let's talk about the movie that made Roger Ebert so angry he basically had a public meltdown in print. I Spit on Your Grave is what happens when someone makes a revenge film and the entire world loses its collective mind about whether it's the most feminist movie ever made or the most anti-feminist movie ever made. Spoiler alert, it's probably neither, but it's saying something. Ebert didn't just hate this movie, he gave it a 0 stars and called it a vile bag of garbage with no shred of artistic distinction, which is pretty harsh, even by film critic standards. It's like if a food critic reviewed a restaurant by setting the menu on fire and screaming at the chef. But here's the thing, Ebert wasn't wrong about the movie being hard to watch. If you haven't seen this movie, the first half of this movie is basically 25 minutes of bad things happening to a girl. It's like 25 minutes leading up to that. It's not like implied or suggested as like I think any of that content should be on movies. It's pretty graphic and brutal, and it's very much designed to make you feel sick. Which raises the obvious question, why would anyone make this, and importantly, why would anyone watch this? The filmmaker's answer was supposedly that you need to see the horror to understand the revenge. Like, you can't appreciate Jennifer's payback unless you fully experience what happened to her. And when you put it that way, I see the point, but I think there is almost ways to do this that you don't need to physically show it. I think implied is like, that's enough, right? But anyways, she does get her revenge. Jennifer goes full creative with it. One guy gets castrated in a bathtub, another gets hung, there's an axe involved at some point. She's basically running a one-woman murder workshop by the end. The guy who attacked her probably didn't expect their victim to turn into a horror movie villain, but here we are. Now, this is where it gets weird. Some feminists love this movie. They said, finally, a movie where the woman fights back and wins. Other feminists hated it and said this is just torture porn disguised as empowerment. And both groups were probably right, which is the most frustrating thing about art. It can be two completely opposite things at the same time. The censors, meanwhile, didn't care about the feminist debate. They just saw a movie with very graphic violence towards women and said absolutely not. The UK banned it until 2001, Ireland banned it, Canada banned it, Norway banned it so hard they probably banned movies that just sound similar to it, like all the sequels. But here's what's really messed up about the whole situation. The movie got banned because of the disturbing scenes, which are horrible and disturbing, but plenty of other movies show this same type of violence without getting banned. The difference was that this one lingered on it. It made you sit with it. Most movies show this type of violence as a quick plot point and move on. This one made it the key point of the entire first act, and that's what freaked everyone out. Not that it happened, but that the camera didn't look away. It's like the difference between mentioning that someone got punched and making someone watch a 20-minute beating. Technically the same thing, but completely different experiences. And in my opinion, I think the movie accomplished what it set out to do. When you really think about it, a lot of us in society want to turn our heads away from this type of violence that exists in the real world, because this is very real stuff, right? Maybe the revenge plot isn't real, but this type of violence that happens is real and is very wrong. And I think a lot of movies want to like use that point to sort of like gloss over it, right? And use that as like a later plot point or whatnot. But this movie didn't. Instead of just turning a blind eye, they force you to watch that. And that's one, disturbing, two, very powerful in a sense of getting you to understand that this is a real issue. I don't have a fully formed opinion on it. I think that there's a lot of ways to look at this type of scene. And at the end of the day, if you are doing a movie like this, you need to be incredibly respectful, probably talk to a lot of women and get their opinions on what this looks like. Because if you're gonna make a movie like this, you should probably do it right. And ideally it is directed or wrote by a woman anyways, because that would make more sense. But anyways, at least that was fiction. One movie's marketing convinced police they witnessed a murder. So imagine you're a movie distributor in 1976 and you have this really bad horror movie that no one wants to see. What do? Well, if you're the people behind Snuff, you add 5 minutes of fake footage to the end and convince the world you just filmed an actual murder. And somehow, this plan actually worked. Snuff started life as this terrible movie called Slaughter. It was about a cult doing cult things. Basically a cheap Manson family knockoff filmed in Argentina because I guess that's where you go when your budget is whatever change you found in your couch cushions. Nobody cared about it. It was designed to disappear into the grindhouse void where bad movies go to die. But then someone had what they probably thought was a genius idea. They tacked on this behind-the-scenes segment where it looks like the film crew keeps rolling after the movie ends. And in this segment, they show what appears to be the director actually murdering a female crew member, like supposedly for real, on camera, because apparently someone thought, you know what this boring cult movie needs? Fake murder footage that looks real. The distributors then hired fake protesters to stand outside of theaters with signs saying ban this film, which is honestly incredibly smart marketing in my opinion. Except their fake outrage worked so well that real protesters started showing up. Suddenly you had actual feminist groups and women from churches marching around with signs, giving this terrible movie way more attention than it deserved. And here's where it gets completely insane. The Manhattan district attorney saw all of this commotion and thought, wait, did we just discover evidence of an actual homicide? So they opened a murder investigation into a movie. Police detectives had to sit down and watch this thing frame by frame, looking for proof that someone actually got killed for a horror movie. Picture being the forensic expert who got assigned this case.
Johnson, we need you to examine the film's footage to determine if this woman is actually murdered or if it's just really convincing special effects.
It's not exactly what you expect when you go to detective school. Hello class, today we'll be learning about blood splatter analysis and also this movie's makeup techniques to see if they're real bruises or not. The investigation concluded that nobody was actually murdered. Shocking, I know. Turns out it was pig intestines and bad acting. The guts being pulled out were from a butcher shop, not a human body. The blood was corn syrup and food coloring. Basically, they figured out that this wasn't a snuff film. It was just a really gross show. But here's the kicker. Even after everyone knew it was fake, the movie kept getting banned. The UK put it on the video nasties list because the UK likes to ban every movie that's scary. Australia refused to let it in. The film had achieved something incredible. It was banned not for being real, but for pretending to be real convincingly enough to fool law enforcement. And that's how this terrible B-movie about a cult became responsible for creating the entire urban legend of snuff films. Before snuff, most people didn't even know what a snuff film was supposed to be. After snuff, everyone was convinced they existed and were being sold in back alleys like some kind of horrifying black market contraband. The whole thing was basically the 1970s version of fake news goes viral, except instead of Facebook, it was grindhouse theaters and word of mouth. Instead of political misinformation, it was people thinking they could buy movies of actual murders. Simpler times. But snuff only pretended to be murder. One director actually ended up getting arrested for their film. So Ruggero Deodato made a movie so convincing, Italian police arrested him for murder. Not attempted murder, not conspiracy to commit murder, just straight up murder. Because they watched this film and thought, well, this guy definitely killed some people on camera, and then had the audacity to sell tickets to watch it. Cannibal Holocaust is basically the granddaddy of found footage horror. You know, that shaky camera style that makes you motion sick and convince your mom that the Blair Witch Project was real. Except Deodato did it in 1980, and he did it so well that when authorities saw it, they genuinely believed they were watching actual documentary footage of people getting murdered in the Amazon. You don't know anything about me, this is my favorite horror subgenre, and I think we need to be making more good movies in this style. Because a lot of the movies that use this style are bad, but the good ones are really scary. I love it. Anyways, the plot is pretty simple. A film crew goes into the jungle to make a documentary about cannibal tribes and disappears. Later, someone finds their footage and watches it. What they see is the crew basically being terrible people who get what's coming to them in increasingly creative and disturbing ways. There's impaling, dismemberment, and enough gore to stock a Halloween store for a decade. But here's what makes it so believable. Deodato had put the actors under contract to stay completely out of public view after filming. No interviews, no appearances, no hey look, I'm still alive social media posts. Well, this was also the 1980s and social media was just people yelling at each other through their windows at this point. The point was to make it seem like these people had actually vanished in the jungle. So when the movie came out and authorities saw what looked like real footage of real people really dying, they did what any reasonable law enforcement agency would do. They arrested the director and charged him with murder. Imagine being Deodato, sitting in jail, trying to explain to your cellmate that you're there because you made a movie that was too realistic. The trial was basically the world's weirdest court case. Deodato had to bring the actors into court to prove they were still alive. Picture that scene. Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A. This person who is clearly not dead. And that wasn't even the worst part. The film also includes real animal killings. Like they actually killed animals on camera. A turtle gets butchered, a monkey gets killed, and it's all filmed in graphic detail, which really isn't needed in a movie like this, or any movie at all really, because like, you can just use practical effects. Don't use real animals, that's not cool. So even after Deodato proved he didn't murder any humans, he still had to deal with charges related to animal cruelty, which is both illegal and deeply messed up. The irony is that Deodato was trying to make a point about media exploitation and who the real savages are. The whole movie is supposedly about how Western filmmakers are worse than the cannibals they're documenting. It's social commentary disguised as gore corn, but authorities weren't really interested in his artistic vision when they thought he'd committed actual homicide. Eventually, Deodato got cleared of the murder charges but still faced legal consequences for the animal cruelty and obscenity. He got a suspended sentence, which is basically the legal equivalent of "don't do that again, Buster." Meanwhile, his movie got banned in about 50 countries and became the most notorious horror film ever made. Now, animals did die for that movie, but our next film used actual human corpses. So just a warning again, this is where the video starts getting really messed up. So if you're not comfortable with these topics, now's your time to turn away. Men Behind the Sun is what happens when someone decides to make an educational film about one of history's worst war crimes, but uses the production techniques of a slasher movie. And somehow, everyone involved thought this was a perfectly reasonable approach to documenting the horrors of Unit 731. For those of you who skipped history class to play video games, Unit 731 was Japan's secret biological warfare unit during World War II. They did medical experiments on prisoners that were so horrific, I'm not going to describe them in detail because YouTube has rules and I like having an income. But let's just say they make everything else we've talked about so far look like first grade math. Just imagine your arm getting really cold, like very, very cold, and what would happen. That's just a little nudge into the direction we're talking about here. Do not watch this movie. Ironically, it is on YouTube, which makes this even more weird, but do not watch this movie. I'm telling you, do not watch this movie. I have never watched this movie. I have only heard about this movie. Don't watch this movie. Director Mo Tun-Fei decided the best way to tell this story was to recreate these experiments with full gore effects and graphic detail. Like, he thought people needed to see every horrible thing in vivid color to really understand how bad it was in history. It's basically film's way of saying you can't appreciate how terrible war is unless I hit you in the face with the brick. But here's where it gets really, really messed up. The movie includes a scene where they supposedly autopsy a real corpse. Not a dummy, not special effects, an actual corpse. The director claimed he got permission from medical authorities to use a cadaver for educational purposes, which raises so many ethical questions I don't even know where to start. And if that wasn't bad enough, there's this infamous scene where they throw a live cat into a room full of starving rats. And the rats and the cat on camera for real. Because apparently the movie wasn't disturbing enough without adding actual animal snuff. Basically, it's like this director watched Cannibal Holocaust and thought, you know what this needs? More real death. The whole thing caused a massive international incident. Japanese ultra-nationalists sent death threats to the director because, understandably, they weren't thrilled about a movie that depicted Japanese soldiers as monsters. Meanwhile, Chinese audiences loved it because it showed Japanese war crimes that had been covered up for decades. So basically, everyone was angry at each other for completely different reasons. Australia banned it immediately. The UK cut several minutes of footage. Most countries took one look at this thing and said, absolutely not, we're not dealing with this today. Which is a reasonable response when someone makes an educational documentary which requires you to have a barf bag and therapy in order to watch. But here's what's really, really weird about the whole situation. The movie was trying to serve an important historical purpose. Unit 731's crimes weren't wildly known, especially in the West. So in a way, the film was doing actual educational work by exposing these atrocities, but it was doing it in the most exploitative way possible. It's like if someone made a documentary about the Holocaust, but filmed it like Saw. Technically, you're educating people about real historical horrors, but you're also turning human suffering into a gross out spectacle. If this was made in a way like Schindler's List was made, yeah, it would still be disturbing. It would still be messed up, but it would be way more approachable to more people and wouldn't cross that very thick line in the sand that you should not cross when making a movie. So again, yes, you're educating people about historical horrors, but you're also turning human suffering into a gross spectacle. And that combination makes everyone deeply uncomfortable. including the censors who have to decide whether to ban it. The director probably thought he was making an important anti-war statement. The censors thought he was making torture porn with a history lesson attached, and they were both probably right, which is what made it so controversial. You can't just ban it for being historically inaccurate because the history is real and likely it only skimmed the surface, but you also can't ignore the fact that it's using real death for shock value. So at the end of the day, this is a very complicated situation, but I don't recommend anybody watching this movie. It's not worth it. I've never seen it, but from Reddit threads I've read, most people don't even find it entertaining. They just find it really disturbing. So don't watch it, but I invite you to give your opinion in the comments about this situation, because I think it's a very interesting discussion point. At the end of the day, I don't know. I wouldn't make something like this. I love horror. I don't think we need to go that in depth into it, but I'm just a YouTuber. Going back to more modern torture horror, well, our next movie made censorship quite simple again. By 2007, you would have think censors had seen everything. We'd already survived the video nasty panic, the cannibal film era, and whatever you want to call the period where everyone was making movies about people eating each other in the woods. But then Eli Roth made Hostel Part 2, and suddenly, grown adults in government offices were having meetings about whether violence could get an X rating. See, Hostel Part 2 is part of what film critics lovingly called the torture porn wave, which is a term that sounds like something your weird uncle would search for on the internet, but it just means horror movies where the main entertainment is watching people get creatively murdered. Think Saw, but with like a travel budget. The plot's pretty straightforward. American girls go to Europe for art school, get lured to Slovakia, and end up in this underground murder club where rich people pay to kill tourists. It's like Airbnb, but for psychopaths. The movie's basically saying, here's what happens when capitalism meets serial killing, which is either brilliant social commentary or just a cheap excuse to show someone getting scalped. Probably both. But Spain looked at this movie and had what can only be described as a complete bureaucratic meltdown. They gave it an X rating, not for two adults doing the nasty, but for violence, which had literally never happened before. An X rating for violence is like getting a speeding ticket for walking too fast. It's not supposed to work that way. This meant the movie could only play in special adult theaters, if you catch my drift. The same places that show actual videos that belong on the X rating list, if you catch my drift. So if you wanted to see Hostel Part 2 in Spain, you had to go to the same theater where lonely guys in trench coats go to watch other kinds of movies. That's not exactly the target audience for horror films, I don't think. Meanwhile, New Zealand took one look at one of the scenes where a woman hangs another woman upside down and takes a bath in her blood and basically said, nope, that's objectionable, which is their official term for banned. They had to cut over 4 minutes to make it legal, which is like editing a recipe for like a beef bowl and removing the beef. Where's the beef? Germany went even further and actually banned the uncut version in court. A judge looked at this movie and said, selling this is now a crime, not just regulated, not just restricted, illegal. Like you could get arrested for having the wrong version of a horror movie, which feels very dystopian when you say it out loud. The whole thing was nuts because by 2007, we were living in the internet age. You could watch worse stuff on your phone during a lunch break, but somehow this particular combination of gore and rich people paying for murder crossed a line that even modern censors couldn't handle. What's really funny is that the movie's actually making fun of exactly this kind of thing. It's satirizing wealthy people who think they can buy anything, including the right to murder. The censors were too busy being horrified to notice they were proving the movie's point about people in power making arbitrary decisions about what's acceptable. That was very mainstream compared to what German censors found in underground cinema. So we've covered movies that got banned for violence, for being too realistic, for showing real death. But Jörg Buttergeit, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, buddy, but you made this movie, so I'm not sorry, managed to get his film banned for something that had never really been a problem before in cinema. Romantic, when someone loves a dead person very much. You know the word I'm referencing, I can't say it, but you know what I'm meaning. It's exactly as weird as it sounds, and somehow even weirder when you actually see it, which I haven't because this sounds disgusting. Necromantic is this German art house horror film about a guy who works cleaning up car accidents, and he's got what you might call an unusual hobby. He likes to bring home body parts from work. His girlfriend is also into this, which raises questions about the relationship that I'm not qualified to answer, and really makes me think that if this guy can get a girlfriend, what the am I doing wrong? Like, seriously, come on. What's the issue? The movie's most infamous scene involves the couple bringing home an actual rotting corpse and having adult time, but with multiple people with it. And I mean that literally. They put a metal pipe where nature intended something else to go and proceed to have what the film presents as a loving romantic encounter. It's like a Hallmark Christmas movie when you really think about it. But if the Hallmark Christmas movie was run by people who'd been banned from regular society. Now, you might think that this sounds like something that would get banned immediately everywhere, and you'd be right. Germany banned it so fast they probably had the paperwork ready before the film was finished. Police raided video stores like they were looking for weapons of mass destruction, except the weapons were VHS tapes of people being affectionate with dead bodies. But here's what's incredible. The ban lasted 27 years. 27 years. That's longer than most of your parents have been married. The German authorities looked at this movie in 1987 and said, absolutely not. And they kept saying absolutely not until 2014. That's commitment. The BBFC in the UK took one look at it in the early 90s and didn't even bother with a rating. They just said, no thank you, we're good. It wasn't until 2014 that they finally passed it uncut, calling it one of the most transgressive films ever made, which is basically the film classification equivalent of saying, this is really messed up, but we guess adults can handle it now. Thing is, the director always insisted that this was art. He said it was about romanticism and death and society's relationship with mortality, which might be true, but it's hard to focus on the deep themes when there's a corpse three-way happening on the screen. The underground horror community treated this movie like the holy grail of forbidden cinema. People would trade bootleg copies like they were dealing drugs. Except instead of getting high, you'd watch it and probably need therapy. It became this legendary thing that most people had heard about, but very few had actually seen. When the bans finally got lifted, the film got proper DVD releases with academic commentary tracks. Nothing says we've moved past the stigma like professors explaining why this type of love can be considered romantic cinema. The whole necromantic situation perfectly shows how censorship can make something way more famous than it would have been otherwise. If they had just ignored it, it probably would have disappeared into the underground film void. Instead, 27-year ban turned it into this mythical forbidden masterpiece that film students write thesis papers about. And the most funny thing about this movie of all is that it is currently streaming on Shudder. One of my favorite subscription services out there. I love Shudder. I love Shudder so much. I don't like that you guys have this movie on there. I understand why you guys have this movie on there, but no. You know, at least it was obviously fiction. But one recent film convinced censors they were just watching pure evil. In 2009, when YouTube existed and you could watch someone get hit by a car on your lunch break, the British Board of Film Classification did something they almost never do anymore. And this is also 2009, keep that in mind. They banned a movie outright. Not cut it, not give it a harsh rating, banned it like it was 1982, and they were still worried about video nasties corrupting the youth. Grotesque is a Japanese film that makes Hostel look like a Disney movie, but a couple who get kidnapped and tortured for an hour. That's it. That's the whole plot. There's no backstory, no character development, no escape attempt that gives you hope. It's just 60 minutes of watching two people get hurt in increasingly creative ways. The BBFC looked at this thing and basically said this poses a real risk of harm to viewers, a real risk of harm from watching a movie. They didn't say it was offensive or inappropriate. They said it was dangerous, like it was a loaded weapon disguised as entertainment, which honestly might not be that far off. I've never seen it, but from what I've read on Reddit threads, is pretty bad. Their reasoning was that the film had little narrative or character development and existed purely to show sadistic cruelty, which is a very polite way of saying this is torture corn with no corn and extra torture. The board basically argued that without any story to give context, it was just an hour-long snuff fantasy designed to get people excited about watching suffering. For a guy that gets freaked out by gore, this sounds like a horrible movie. What's wild is that by 2009, we'd already seen the Saw franchise turn torture into a Hollywood franchise. We'd survived Hostel, Turistas, and whatever other movies were teaching us that traveling abroad will get you murdered by the locals. But somehow, this Japanese film crossed a line that even modern censors couldn't handle. The difference was probably that those other movies had plots. Saw had elaborate death traps and moral lessons about appreciating life. Hostel had social commentary about American tourists. Grotesque had a guy with some rope, and he had a really bad attitude. No deeper meaning, no clever twists, just pure sadism served straight up. And this is where it gets really funny in like a very wrong way. The internet had already made way worse stuff available to anyone with Wi-Fi and questionable judgment. You could probably find actual real violence online easier than you could find a copy of Grotesque. but the BBFC was drawing the line at fictional torture that was too realistic and too focused. The ban created this weird situation where a movie most people had never heard of suddenly became notorious for being the thing the UK wouldn't let adults watch. It's like when your parents tell you not to touch something and suddenly that's the only thing you want to touch, except the something is a movie designed to make you puke. Director Koji Shiraishi probably never expected his little film to become a landmark in modern censorship. He was just making another entry in Japan's extreme horror scene, not trying to break the British classification system. But that's exactly what happened. He made something so purely focused on suffering that even liberal modern censors said, absolutely not. This whole thing perfectly shows that even in our desensitized modern world, there are still lines that most of society won't cross. Apparently, that line is somewhere between elaborate death traps with moral lessons and just watching people get hurt for no reason, which when you think about it, is probably a reasonable place to draw that line. And I agree, we don't need to see that, but that's the glory of human life. You don't have to have the same opinion as me. If you have a different opinion, I'd like you to drop it in the comments and let me know what you think about this whole thing. I think it invites a very interesting discussion. If you enjoyed watching this video and weren't too creeped out by it, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because again, that's how YouTube knows this video is a good video. And comment down below if there's any other movies that are like really banned or something that you want me to cover. I need to go bleach my eyes now because this was a very hard video to make. But if you want to watch another one of my videos that is maybe a little less crazy, click the video on screen now.